The precinct breathed in fluorescent rhythm. The ceiling lights, each one an aging pulse of white noise, hummed above the tiled floor like a machine unsure if it was alive. The air smelled faintly of coffee that had burned too long on a warmer, and the ghost of disinfectant, an odor meant to suggest cleanliness, not deliver it. A monitor glowed in the center of the room. The image looped on repeat, a figure running, a voice shouting commands, a flash, a collapse. The loop reset. Each replay shaved away what little humanity remained of it. The officers gathered around the screen watched with professional detachment. Their faces reflected in the glass, motionless, washed in the sterile light of procedure. Sergeant Halverson stood with his arms folded, jaw tight, a badge clipped precisely to his chest. The badge caught the light every few seconds, flashing like a pulse. Beside him, a younger officer, Reed, took notes. His handwriting was neat, almost tender in its precision. "Timestamp it," Halverson said. His voice was calm, clipped. 17 seconds between first contact and discharge. Reed nodded. "Yes, sir." 17.4, the playback continued. On the screen, the woman fell again, a dark shape against asphalt. The camera shook. The footage blurred. A command echoed, "Stop! Stop!" Then a sound that was not a command at all. No one spoke when it ended. The sound of the fluorescent buzzing filled the space that a prayer might have occupied. Lieutenant Duran entered the room, coffee in one hand, paperwork in the other. His tie was immaculate, the knot symmetrical, the color dark enough to suggest authority. "How far are we?" he asked. Finishing the incident report, Halverson said, "We'll need your signature before it goes upstairs." Duran set his coffee beside the stack of unfiled reports on the counter. They leaned slightly to one side, curling at the edges from humidity. Dust traced the seams of forgotten cases. He looked at the monitor. "Loop it again." The command came without emphasis, the way someone might ask to see a weather report. The footage restarted, and the woman's final movement repeated itself under the steady whine of fluorescent light. "This is the edited version?" Duran asked. "Yes," Halverson said. "Body cam from Officer Merrin, footage trimmed to departmental relevance." "Good," Duran replied. He watched for exactly 20 seconds before looking away. "Make sure it's logged as an ongoing review. Use the standard language. Suspect failed to comply, officer feared for safety, weapon discharged in accordance with protocol." Reed's pen hesitated over the paper. "Sir," he said, almost inaudible, "should we note the discrepancy about the—" Halverson's glance stopped him. The silence that followed was dense, shaped like warning. "Follow protocol," Duran said, not looking up. He took his coffee again, sipped it, and left the room. The door shut softly, but the echo lingered, a hollow punctuation mark at the end of something irreversible. The monitor dimmed. Halvorsen turned toward Reed. "Don't think too much." "It's all procedure." Reed nodded, but the pen in his hand didn't move for several seconds. At another desk, a clerk typed steadily, key by key. The rhythm filled the room, a mechanical heartbeat. In a nearby cubicle, the printer began spitting out forms, each one identical to the last. The sound blended into the hum of the lights, into the faint rustle of pages. Everything was movement without meaning. Outside the glass wall of the conference room, a janitor pushed a mop across the linoleum. The water in the bucket was grey, the mop head frayed. He didn't look at the officers, and they didn't look at him. His presence was part of the architecture, maintenance as background like the hum of electricity. Halverson sat. His chair creaked slightly under his weight. He reached for the report, flipped a page, and began reading aloud in the flat tone of repetition. Subject: officer-involved shooting. Date: October 14th. Time: 22:43 hours. Location: East Division parking lot. Victim identified as— he paused, glancing at the name. Angela Cross, 26. The words hung there. For a moment, even the hum seemed to falter. Then it resumed. Reed's pen scratched across the paper. Civilian complaint history? He asked as if it mattered. None on record, Halverson said. He initialed the bottom of the page and slid it into the growing stack. The gesture was practiced, almost elegant in its precision. Each document stacked neatly over the last, until the human shape beneath the incident disappeared entirely beneath paper. On the far wall, the precinct's clock ticked steadily. Each second echoed faintly against the tile, louder than any of the men speaking. Hours passed like that, quiet, procedural, efficient. The woman on the screen fell again and again. Her death became part of the shift routine, a data point, a timestamp, an entry code. At one point, Reed rose to stretch. He stared briefly through the glass at the hallway beyond. Posters lined the corridor, community outreach, recruitment, smiling faces in uniform. The faces seemed to watch him back. When he turned, Halverson was signing off the final page. "That's it," the sergeant said. "We'll file it in the morning." Reed nodded, gathered the papers and stacked them neatly beside the others. The dust on the counter shifted slightly, displaced by the weight. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the lights pressed down on them. Then Halverson said quietly, "She ran." Reed didn't answer. He looked at the badge on Halverson's chest, polished to a mirror's shine, and saw his own reflection warped in its curve. Halverson looked back at the monitor. "They always run," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The monitor went dark. For the first time that night, the room was silent, truly silent, without hum, without pretense. The fluorescent tubes flickered once, twice, then steadied. The sound of the clock became unbearable. Outside, rain began to fall, thin and steady against the windows. It traced long vertical lines down the glass, lines that caught the reflection of the interior lights, bending them like the distorted image of truth itself. The janitor paused his mopping to look at the rain. The officers did not. They filed their forms, powered down the monitor and gathered their coats. When the last door closed behind them, the only light left was from the flickering bulb above the empty desk. It hummed once more, then dimmed to a whisper. The report sat on the counter, ink still drying. The name at the top, Angela Cross, lay in black letters that would never fade, yet meant nothing at all within the system that produced them. Somewhere in the dark, a printer clicked awake again, feeding another blank page into the mechanism. The system, ever efficient, was ready for the next report. Dawn arrived without ceremony. The first light crept over the horizon, pale and exhausted, slipping through the blinds of a modest home on the edge of the city. The walls held the quiet discipline of a soldier's quarters, uncluttered, efficient, measured in its stillness. A uniform hung by the door pressed sharp, the insignia polished to a dull gleam. Beneath it sat a pair of boots perfectly aligned. Everything in the room bore the imprint of order. Everything except the silence, which had begun to feel heavier than air. Outside, an engine idled. The sound came softly at first, a low hum blending with the rustle of morning wind, but Elijah Cross heard it. He always heard such things. Years of command had taught him the music of intrusion, the subtle change in atmosphere, before something unwelcome arrived. He stood at the window, watching the black sedan park against the curb. The vehicle was unmarked, yet unmistakably official, its stillness too deliberate, its windows too dark. Two men stepped out, both in plain suits, their postures carrying the self-conscious weight of authority. Elijah didn't move. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. A man in a plain grey t-shirt, short hair streaked with grey at the temples, eyes that had seen battlefields where men died, nameless and swift. He had imagined every kind of death, except this one. The knock came, two measured raps, evenly spaced, the rhythm of protocol. He opened the door. "Major Cross?" The taller of the two men spoke. His voice was neutral, trained for this exact moment. He wore the expression of someone who had been told to convey sympathy without participating in it. "Yes," Elijah said. His tone was level, unwelcoming. "I'm Detective Halverson, City Precinct. This is Officer Reed. May we come in?" He hesitated. The name flickered in his mind, though he didn't know why. Then he stepped aside. They entered like men stepping into sacred ground, respectful, cautious, aware of their intrusion. The house felt smaller with them in it. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of starch from the uniform by the door. Halvorsen adjusted his jacket. "Sir, we're here on behalf of the department to inform you of an incident that occurred last night involving your sister." Elijah didn't move. His breathing slowed until it was nearly imperceptible. Halvorsen continued, his tone mechanical as if reading from an invisible card. "At approximately 22:43 hours, officers responded to a disturbance near East Division. During the encounter, your sister, Angela Cross, was fatally wounded by gunfire." The words did not echo. They fell into the room like stones into deep water, swallowed without a sound. Reed, standing just behind, shifted his weight. His gaze flicked toward the mantel, where a folded American flag rested beneath a photograph of Elijah in uniform. He cleared his throat softly, almost apologetically. Elijah's eyes remained on Halverson. "Fatal," he said. The word came out flat, an assessment, not disbelief. "Yes, sir. She was pronounced deceased on the scene. There will be a full review. The department expresses its—" Halverson hesitated just slightly, then resumed. "Its condolences." Elijah's gaze drifted to the side. The coffee on the table had gone cold, a faint ring of steam marking where heat had once been. He stared at it longer than he intended. "May I ask," he said finally, "which officers were involved?" Halverson's posture stiffened. "I'm not authorized to release names at this stage, Major. There's an active investigation." A muscle in Elijah's jaw twitched. "I didn't ask for authorization." Silence expanded between them, the kind that made men aware of their own breathing. Reed looked down at the floor. He saw the boots aligned beneath the hanging uniform. The symmetry unsettled him. Halverson spoke again, more gently now. "I understand this is difficult, sir. If you wish, there will be a liaison assigned to your family, someone to guide you through the process." "The process," Elijah repeated, as though testing the taste of the word. It came out slow, deliberate. "I'm familiar with process, Detective." Halverson nodded once. "Of course." They stood in a tableau of forced civility. The morning light crept across the floorboards, touching the folded flag, the edge of the coffee mug, then Elijah's bare feet. He didn't move. Finally he said, "Was she armed?" Halvorsen hesitated. "No, sir." "Was she threatening anyone?" The officers perceived. Elijah raised his hand slightly. It was not a gesture of interruption, but of finality. The same motion he'd used on deployment when ending a briefing, signaling that no more words were needed. "I see," he said. Halvorsen looked at him, perhaps searching for something, anger, grief, collapse, but found only composure. The Major's face was unreadable, carved from restraint. After a moment, Halvorsen cleared his throat. "If there's anything you require—" "There isn't." Reed shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir." Elijah turned his gaze toward the young officer. "No," he said quietly. "You're not. But you will be." The words landed with surgical precision. Not shouted, not vengeful, merely inevitable. Halvorsen straightened. "Major Cross—" But Elijah had already turned away. He walked to the window, looking out toward the car still idling at the curb. The light had grown stronger now, illuminating the condensation on the glass, the faint trace of his own breath fogging its surface. Behind him the detectives waited. When it became clear no further words would come, Halvorsen nodded curtly to Reed. They left as they had come, quietly, professionally, leaving the door to close itself. Elijah remained by the window long after the sound of the engine faded. He stood perfectly still, hands resting on the sill, eyes fixed on nothing. His breathing was measured, controlled. Each inhale a command, each exhale an act of obedience. Minutes passed. Then his gaze fell to the mantel, the folded flag, the photograph beside it, his sister's smile frozen in the glass. He reached for the coffee mug. It was cold. He lifted it anyway, held it for a long moment, then set it back down in the exact same place. The morning light reached the corner of the room, illuminating dust that hung in the air like fine ash. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, faint, routine, unconcerned. Inside, the silence thickened until it became its own kind of sound. Elijah turned toward the uniform by the door. The insignia gleamed faintly in the light, precise and sterile. He stared at it as though it were an old comrade whose loyalty had become suspect. Then slowly he walked toward it. He straightened the collar, smoothed a wrinkle from the sleeve. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial. When he stepped back, the uniform hung flawless again, ready for whatever came next. In that small ordered room, grief found no space to weep. It simply stood at attention. The hearing room was built for order, not truth. It was rectangular, windowless and overlit, an antiseptic box where everything human was flattened under fluorescent light. Rows of metal chairs faced a long table with microphones, each one waiting like a surgical instrument. The air was too still, too clean, as though it had been filtered to remove all traces of sincerity. Elijah Cross sat in the gallery, his posture straight, hands folded in his lap. He wore his dress uniform, pressed and immaculate, its dark fabric absorbing the light that reflected harshly from every other surface. Around him cameras blinked red, recording dissecting, preserving nothing but performance. At the table below, the accused officers sat with their counsel, 3 men in uniform, their badges catching the light. Their faces were blank in that particular way only trained professionals could manage, the expressionless calm of those who knew the script and their role within it. Across from them sat the civilian review panel, 5 members, their faces earnest, their pens ready, each trying to look like the moral compass of a city gone astray. The chairwoman, a woman in her 60s with careful posture, adjusted her glasses and leaned toward the microphone. "This hearing of the Civil Oversight Commission is now in session," she said. Her voice echoed faintly through the chamber's acoustics. "We are convened to review the actions of Officers Merrin, Torres, and Finch in the incident resulting in the death of Angela Cross." Her pronunciation was crisp. The name Angela Cross sounded procedural, detached from the person who had carried it. Elijah's eyes did not move. His expression remained carved from stone. The prosecutor began. "Let the record show that the body cam footage has been reviewed by this committee. We will now hear testimony from the involved officers." Officer Merrin leaned toward the microphone. The small device glinted under the light, a single unblinking eye. "Sir," Merrin began, voice measured, "we responded to a report of a disturbance. The suspect failed to comply with lawful orders and made a movement that was perceived as a threat. I discharge my weapon in accordance with training and departmental policy." Each word dropped with the dull weight of bureaucratic precision. The microphone flattened his tone, stripping it of humanity. The prosecutor asked a question. Merrin answered it exactly as trained. The next officer repeated nearly identical phrasing. The panel nodded in synchronized understanding. Notes were written, boxes checked. The ticking of the wall clock became louder. Each second carved the room thinner, more airless. In the second row, a reporter whispered into her recorder. "Officer involved shooting hearing day 1, she murmured. "Proceedings remain orderly. Public reaction minimal." Elijah heard her. He heard everything. The scrape of a pen, the hum of the cameras, the subtle squeak of polished shoes shifting on tile. Every sound layered over itself, forming the quiet machinery of civility that concealed something far older and crueler. One of the panelists, a young man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. "Officer Merrin, was there any indication that the suspect was armed?" "No, sir." "Then what was the perceived threat?" She reached into her pocket. The young man paused. "For what?" "I couldn't tell." Silence. The clock ticked. Then the chairwoman spoke softly with a voice designed for empathy. "We understand these situations unfold rapidly. Officers must make difficult decisions in a matter of seconds." The words floated gently into the air, landing like ash. From the gallery, Elijah's gaze remained fixed on the microphone. It was small, harmless, a mere conduit for words. But in this room it was the weapon, turning violence into narrative, blood into procedure. Merrin swallowed, his Adam's apple jerking. "I feared for my safety, ma'am." The phrase filled the space, sealing the outcome. It was the incantation of absolution. Elijah closed his eyes briefly. The motion was barely perceptible, yet the air seemed to shift when he did it. When he opened them again, the world looked harder. His sister's name was spoken again, this time by the prosecutor. It was pronounced correctly, but without gravity. Angela Cross, subject not person. Victim not woman. The clock struck the hour. The sound reverberated through the room like an accusation. The chairwoman leaned toward the microphone. "We will recess for 10 minutes. Chairs scraped against the floor. Voices rose in polite murmurs. Cameras blinked and turned, following the officers as they stood and stretched, adjusting their ties and cuffs, chatting softly with counsel. Elijah remained seated. From the far side of the room, he could see the reflection of the hearing table in a pane of glass. Distorted by glare, the figures warped and shimmering. It looked truer that way. When the session resumed, the panel allowed the defense counsel to make closing remarks. He was a thin man with an impeccable tie, his voice smooth and toneless. "These officers acted in accordance with training," he said. "It is unfortunate when such tragedies occur, but they followed protocol. To second-guess decisions made in high-pressure environments undermines the safety of those who protect our city. He paused, letting the statement settle like dust. Elijah's hands tightened around each other in his lap, but his face remained calm. His silence was absolute. It drew attention without asking for it. Even the chairwoman glanced toward him, as if sensing a force that could not be contained by the proceedings. One of the cameras turned slightly to capture his face. The red light blinked. He met its gaze. For one heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hold still. The air changed. Something cold and precise entered it. Not rage, not grief, clarity. When the verdict came, it was phrased delicately. The Commission finds insufficient evidence to support disciplinary action. The officers acted within the scope of departmental policy. No one looked surprised. The chairwoman thanked everyone for their professionalism. The cameras zoomed out. The microphones clicked off. The illusion of justice folded neatly back into bureaucracy. Elijah stood. The movement was slow, deliberate. Her uniform straightening itself, not in respect but refusal. Every head turned slightly. The sound of his chair scraping backward was the loudest thing in the room. He walked down the aisle. Each step echoed against the tile. Measured, hollow, final. No one spoke. Even the clock seemed to pause as he passed it. At the door, he stopped for a moment and looked back. Not at the officers, not at the panel, but at the empty microphone. Its black stem curved upward like a question that would never be answered. Then he left. Outside the hearing room, the hallway stretched long and sterile. The walls were painted the color of compromise. His reflection moved with him across the polished floor, following like a shadow he no longer recognized. He walked until he reached the exit. The city waited beyond the glass doors, its noise muffled by the insulation of the building. When he stepped into the daylight, it was bright enough to make him squint. He paused on the steps, his breath visible in the cool morning air. Behind him, the hearing continued in paperwork and press releases. Ahead of him, the world went on unchanged. Elijah adjusted his uniform collar, squared his shoulders, and began to walk. Each step carried the weight of decision, not destination. Somewhere behind him, the clock ticked again. And the sound, faint but steady, marked the beginning of something that could not be undone. The base rose from the desert like an unfinished idea, rows of steel barracks, angular shadows stretching long in the afternoon heat. Nothing here grew. The air itself seemed to have been disciplined into stillness. Elijah Cross returned as the sun began to fall behind the wire perimeter, washing the compound in copper light. The sentry at the gate straightened immediately, saluting with sharp precision. Elijah acknowledged it with the smallest nod. No words were exchanged. The convoy that brought him, one vehicle unmarked, rolled through the checkpoint. The hum of the engine was low, steady, disciplined like the man it carried. When it stopped near Command Barracks 3, Elijah stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his boots in metered rhythm. He moved through the base as though through memory. The clang of distant weights in the training hangar, the whistle of drills, the muted cadence of boots hitting dirt in unison. It was all familiar, all precise, all shaped by the same machine he now understood too well. Inside the command office, Captain Hayes was waiting. He rose when Elijah entered, his uniform crisp, his hair buzzed to the scalp. "Major," he said, "welcome back, sir. We didn't expect you until next month." Elijah removed his cap and placed it carefully on the desk. "Change of schedule." Hayes nodded once, then hesitated. "Sir, I heard about your sister. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were sincere, but they landed on Elijah like pebbles on armor. "Thank you," he said simply. Hayes waited, uncertain if he should say more. Then he gestured toward the operations board. Training cycle resumed at 600. Bravo units prepping for inspection. "We've got an intel review scheduled for—" "That can wait," Elijah said. His voice was even, but it carried a weight that closed the air between them. Hayes swallowed. "Understood, sir." Elijah turned to the window. Beyond the glass, rows of soldiers moved in formation, their movements synchronized, mechanical. Each command from the drill sergeant cracked through the air like the lash of a whip. Left, left, halt. Dust rose, hung suspended, and fell again. He watched in silence for several seconds before speaking. "Tell the men I'll address them at 1900. "Yes, sir." When Hayes left, Elijah remained by the window. The glass reflected his image faintly, overlapping the marching soldiers outside. He could see both, the individual and the institution, layered like ghosts. He exhaled once, slow, controlled. At 1900 hours, the men assembled in the briefing hangar. Rows of chairs faced the front, where the American flag hung from the rafters, its edges motionless in the still air. The soldiers were elite, Special Response Command, Tier 1 clearance, the kind of unit summoned only when the system itself faltered. Elijah entered without announcement. The room straightened to attention in perfect synchronization. At ease, he said. The order released a collective breath, but no one relaxed fully. His tone carried a new timbre, still calm, still precise, but sharpened by something underneath. He stood at the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back. The overhead lights reflected faintly on his polished insignia. "You've all heard something about what happened in the city?" he began. "You've heard fragments. A name, a mistake, a line of procedure that ended with a body on asphalt." No one moved. The silence was total, he continued. "The machine that governs this country runs on order. Discipline, obedience, that's what we're taught to protect. But every machine has its weakness." His voice remained level, but each word struck with the precision of a command. Sometimes that weakness isn't external. It's not an enemy. It's inside, woven into the gears, hidden behind paperwork and protocol. A muscle in his jaw tightened. "What we do next," he said, "will not be recorded as an operation. It will not appear on any log. It will not violate a single law. But it will expose the truth of what's been hidden." He paused. Eyes met his, dozens of them, sharp and unwavering. Men who trusted him with their lives. Men who had followed him into places no one else would go. "We'll call it an audit," Elijah said. "That's all anyone needs to know." The word hung in the air, benign yet loaded. It was not a command for vengeance. It was something colder, purer. Reckoning through precision. Captain Hayes will handle logistics. Team leads will receive classified instructions at 2300. We move only through official channels. No deviation. No improvisation. Every action must be justified in the light of law. He looked out over the men, each one still silent, waiting. "This isn't about revenge," he said finally. "It's about accountability." But in his eyes there was something else, something that made the word accountability sound like judgment. Dismissed. The command broke the stillness. Chairs scraped, boots struck concrete, voices murmured low. The rhythm of order resumed, efficient as ever. Elijah remained behind after they left. The hangar lights buzzed faintly. He stood before the flag, staring up at its folds. In its fabric, he saw both what he'd fought for and what had betrayed him. Later, in his quarters, the quiet was surgical. On the metal shelf, his sister's photograph rested against the wall. She was smiling, sunlight in her hair, eyes half squinting toward the camera. The image felt impossibly distant, like a postcard from a life that had never been his. He sat at his desk and opened a secure file. Names, addresses, internal codes. The system that had excused the officers was built on layers of authorization, buried in digital corridors only a few could access. Elijah was one of them. He began typing. Not hacking, not breaking, simply navigating the labyrinth with the same precision that had once guided him through battlefields. Every keystroke was deliberate. Every access request perfectly legitimate on paper. He stopped at a field labeled Internal Oversight. He clicked once. Lines of data unfolded across the screen. There they were. Reports marked confidential, time-stamped with the same hour his sister's body cooled on the pavement. Every signature aligned, every word standardized. A system too perfect, to be honest. He leaned back, the glow of the monitor cutting across his face. The hum of the air conditioning blended with the faint rhythm of boots outside. Soldiers moving in formation somewhere in the dark. He closed the file and stood. Outside, the night air was cool, dry and filled with the metallic tang of dust and machinery. The base lights stretched in straight lines, disappearing into shadow. He walked the length of the barracks. The rows of boots under each bunk were aligned perfectly. Laces tucked, leather polished. Discipline as doctrine. The same discipline that made men follow orders without question. He stopped near the armory. Through the narrow window, light glinted on rifle barrels, rows of them silent, waiting. Tools of lawful violence. He stared for a long moment. Then he whispered almost to himself, "Lawful. Not just. The distinction settled in the air like fine dust. When he returned to his quarters, the clock read 22:58, 2 minutes until the next phase. He sat at his desk again, hands steady. He picked up the secure radio, pressed the button, and spoke quietly into it. "Echo team, stand by for authorization pattern Delta 7, static answered. Then a single voice. "Standing by, sir." Elijah looked once more at the photograph of his sister. Then he switched off the desk light. The base fell into darkness, silent, obedient, waiting for orders that would never appear in any official record. And somewhere deep within that silence, the line between justice and retribution dissolved completely. The city slept uneasily beneath a haze of sodium light. Thin fog drifted through the streets, blurring the edges of the buildings, until the skyline looked like a half-forgotten drawing. In the distance, sirens wailed and faded, more habit than emergency. Somewhere a train passed, its metal song swallowed by the night, and through that quiet a convoy moved. 3 armored SUVs, unmarked but unmistakably official. Their headlights cut narrow tunnels through the fog, 2 beams at a time, steady and unwavering. Inside the lead vehicle sat Major Elijah Cross. He wore civilian black, his uniform folded neatly in a duffel beside him. His face was expressionless, but the reflection of the dashboard light carved his profile into something sharper than stone. The silence in the cabin was near total, only the low hum of the engine and the soft static of the encrypted radio. Captain Hayes sat in the passenger seat, eyes forward. "ETA 3 minutes, he said. Elijah nodded. Behind them, the second and third vehicles followed in disciplined intervals. Inside, soldiers waited with calm precision, not adrenaline. Their movements were economical, their eyes alert. They were not on a battlefield tonight, but the posture was the same. At precisely 02 South, the convoy turned onto a quiet street lined with darkened storefronts. The police precinct rose at the end of it, a grey rectangle of concrete and glass, its flag hanging limp in the motionless air. 2 security lights glowed over the entrance, throwing twin pools of light onto the wet pavement. Elijah watched the building through the windshield. The precinct looked almost peaceful, its walls silent, its windows dark. Yet to him it radiated the same stillness he'd seen in war zones just before the first breach, a silence built on ignorance of what was coming. He checked his watch. The second hand swept past 12. "Proceed," he said quietly. The convoy stopped with perfect synchronization. Doors opened in soft, practiced rhythm. No shouting, no rush, only movement. 8 soldiers disembarked, each in plain tactical gear marked only by a small federal emblem. Their boots struck the pavement softly, a sound like punctuation. They carried no rifles, only compact holsters, body cameras, and sealed evidence containers. Lawful instruments. Captain Hayes approached the precinct doors with 2 men. The glass reflected their approach, ghost-like. A security guard inside stirred, confused, then tensed as the badges flashed under the fluorescent lights. "Federal Oversight Directive," Hayes said, his voice calm. "We're here to execute a lawful seizure of digital and physical evidence related to case E1476. The guard's hand hesitated near the phone on his desk. He looked past them at the convoy outside, at the silent figures waiting. Something in their stillness convinced him. He pressed the buzzer. The magnetic lock disengaged with a metallic click. Inside, the air was colder, filled with the hum of ceiling lights. The same sterile brightness Elijah remembered from the footage, the same light under which his sister's death had been dissected into procedure. He stepped through the doorway last, his boots meeting the tile with deliberate precision. "Secure the perimeter," he ordered quietly. The soldiers fanned out through the corridors, moving in pairs. Radios murmured in code, the language of discipline. In the records office, rows of metal cabinets stood like soldiers in formation. Their labels read, "Incident reports, internal memos, body cam archives." Dust clung to the edges, untouched for months. Elijah stopped before one cabinet marked "Confidential, internal use only." He rested his hand on the drawer handle, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm. Then he opened it. Folders lay inside, perfectly ordered, each stamped with the seal of the department. The ink shimmered faintly under the overhead light. He lifted one case file, Cross Angela. The folder was thick. Too thick, he opened it. Inside were pages of transcribed interviews, Witness statements redacted, reports rewritten, a script of a tragedy rewritten into policy. On the last page, the line he expected, no violation of protocol determined. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he placed it carefully into a sealed evidence envelope. Hayes entered behind him. "Sir, we've retrieved the digital backups from the evidence server. All chain of custody records accounted for." "Good," Elijah said. "Verify every transfer. I want nothing questioned." "Yes, sir." They moved through the precinct in silence, gathering files, hard drives, data terminals. The sound of their boots on tile was the only noise, steady, rhythmic, restrained. In the interrogation room, the overhead light flickered. A single microphone rested on the table, unplugged. Elijah paused, staring at it. He remembered it from the footage, the same table, the same camera angle. The room where testimony became theater. He unplugged the power cord from the wall and coiled it neatly. The gesture was not destruction, it was closure. Down the hall, one of the soldiers called softly, "Sir, you'll want to see this." Elijah followed. The soldier stood before a small safe in the deputy's office, its door slightly ajar. Inside lay a stack of unlabeled USB drives and one folder marked classified. Internal Review Board. Elijah lifted it. The paper was still warm from the copier. He flipped it open. The first page bore signatures: Halverson, Duran, Merrin. The words "cleared of misconduct" printed neatly above each line. Below them, a timestamp. The timestamp matched the minute his sister had died. He closed the folder. His hands did not tremble. "Secure everything," he said quietly. "No detail missed." The soldier nodded. They worked another 20 minutes. The building remained silent except for the measured rhythm of footsteps and the faint mechanical hum of the copier, still cooling. At 03:10, the convoy was loaded. Every item catalogued, logged, sealed under federal authority. Elijah signed the manifest himself, signature precise, centered, final. As he stepped outside, the fog had thickened. Headlights cut through it like searchlights through smoke. The city remained unaware. He paused at the steps of the precinct, looking back once. Through the glass doors, he could see the reflection of the fluorescent lights, sterile and unfeeling. The same lights that had illuminated lies. Hayes approached, clipboard in hand. "All secured, sir. Ready for transport." Elijah nodded. "Then we're finished here. Do you want the precinct notified of federal custody transfer?" "No, let them find the absence." Hayes said nothing more. Elijah turned, walking back to the lead vehicle. As he opened the door, he caught sight of his reflection in the glass, a figure half lit by headlights, half claimed by shadow. He spoke softly, to no one in particular. "No gunfire, no blood. Just truth extracted." The convoy engines started in unison. The sound was low and resonant, a kind of mechanical heartbeat moving through the fog. As they drove away, the precinct faded into the mist until it was just another grey shape swallowed by the night. Inside the vehicle, the sealed folder lay on the seat beside him. The word "classified" glared under the dashboard light. Elijah rested his hand on it. Not in triumph, but in acknowledgement of what was coming and what it would cost. Outside, the city began to stir. The first hints of dawn brushed the fog with pale light. The night silence thinned, replaced by the hum of morning machinery, unaware that the machinery of justice had already begun to turn against itself. And in the brief stillness before sunrise, Major Elijah Cross closed his eyes and breathed the same air that had filled those sterile rooms of deceit. But here, in the open air, it no longer smelled of procedure. It smelled of reckoning. The federal hearing room was colder than it needed to be. The air carried the faint scent of disinfectant and old paper, the smell of bureaucracy preserved. The ceiling lights hummed softly, white and unwavering, their reflection stretching across the polished table like an unbroken blade. At the front of the chamber stood Major Elijah Cross. His uniform was immaculate, pressed to perfection, the silver of his insignia catching every glint of light. On the table before him lay a single folder. Classified, Internal Review Board. Behind him, rows of journalists, senators, and officers filled the seats in measured silence. Cameras blinked red, tiny mechanical eyes recording every movement. Across from him sat the panel, 6 officials from the Federal Oversight Commission, faces expressionless, their posture synchronized in the language of authority. To their right, the accused, 3 officers in dark suits, badges removed, shoulders stiff with practiced composure. The same men who had once sat beneath the precinct's flickering lights, delivering statements in the language of protocol. Now they looked smaller under federal illumination. The chairman adjusted his glasses. "Major Cross," he said, voice clipped, "you may begin your presentation." Elijah did not look at him. He opened the folder. The motion was deliberate, surgical. Inside were the documents, files, transcripts, the anatomy of deceit. 6 weeks ago, he began, his tone even, each word a measured strike. 3 officers of the Metro Police Department discharged their weapons during what was reported as a compliance intervention. The victim was unarmed. The internal review determined no violation of procedure. He paused. The silence that followed was dense, alive. However, he continued, the evidence seized under federal order contradicts every element of that finding. He slid the first document forward. The panel members leaned in. On the screen behind him the image appeared, a time-stamped body cam still, the moment of the gunfire frozen in grainy digital light. The internal report claims the suspect resisted arrest. The footage shows otherwise. The next slide played in slow motion. The room was filled with the sterile echo of the recording. A command shouted, a breath drawn, then gunfire. 3 shots in succession, hollow and final. Elijah did not flinch. His voice remained even. The review board's timestamp indicates this footage was viewed, analyzed and cleared within 11 minutes of the incident. That clearance was signed by the same 3 officers present today. He turned a page. Further examination revealed 32 alterations to official statements made by witnesses, each aligning with departmental language suggesting aggression by the victim. Every edit was performed from the same terminal. The user ID corresponds to Sergeant Halverson. Halverson's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward his attorney, then away. The room remained still. The sound of a pen scratching on paper somewhere in the back seemed louder than it should have. Elijah continued. We recovered an unsigned memorandum, dated the morning after the shooting, outlining the department's media strategy. It refers to the deceased as a non-compliant suspect. The victim's name, Angela Cross, appears nowhere in the text. He let the name hang there. For the first time, his composure cracked slightly, not visibly but in the weight behind the words. The syllables of his sister's name seemed to tremble in the air before landing, solid, irrevocable. He reached into the folder once more and withdrew a small photograph. It was placed face up on the table, a woman smiling, sunlight on her face. A photo taken before the machinery of justice reduced her to a case number. This is the person erased from those documents, he said. No one moved. Even the chairman, rigid in his neutrality, shifted in his chair. Elijah looked down at the photo, then closed the folder over it, not to conceal her, but to mark the point. The evidence before you is not about one night or one department. It is about a system that teaches its own to survive exposure rather than earn trust. His voice was steady again, low but carrying. That system counted on silence. It relied on the comfort of indifference. I do not bring this forward for retribution, but for record, so that the record may finally match the truth. The chairman cleared his throat, perhaps to reclaim control of the room. Major Cross, are you suggesting a coordinated cover-up? Elijah turned his gaze on him, calm, unblinking. I am not suggesting it. I am proving it. The screens behind him filled with signatures, dates, internal emails, lines connecting them like veins in an X-ray of institutional deceit. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The sound of cameras shuttering broke the silence, rapid, insistent. Halverson leaned forward suddenly, voice breaking through. You think this will change anything? You think any of this matters? Elijah didn't look at him. It matters to her. The room stilled again. Halvorsen slumped back, the outburst spent. The chairman's voice was smaller now. These materials will be entered into record for immediate review. Elijah nodded once. Then my purpose here is complete. He gathered the folder, slid it closed, and stepped back from the microphone. The soft click as it disconnected echoed through the chamber. As he turned to leave, the chairman began to speak again, perhaps to offer procedural thanks, perhaps to reassert authority. But Elijah was already walking down the aisle, each step measured. Reporters whispered. Cameras followed, yet he did not look up. He had no interest in spectacle. At the door he paused. Through the glass panels, morning light was beginning to creep across the marble floor outside, pale and thin but growing. He stepped into it. The corridor was quiet. Federal employees moved in hushed tones, clutching files, murmuring into phones. He walked past them without acknowledgement, his footsteps the only constant sound. At the end of the hall, a window stretched from floor to ceiling. The sun had fully risen now, washing the city in cold light. The buildings glowed faintly, glass and steel revealing the imperfections hidden by night. He stood there a long moment, watching. Below, traffic began its daily crawl. Life resumed its indifferent rhythm. The city was not redeemed, not absolved, but it was seen. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. His sister's face caught the sunlight. For the first time, the light did not feel cruel. He pressed the photo against the glass just for a moment, letting it meet the dawn. Then he lowered it, folding it carefully back into his jacket. Behind him, the hearing room doors closed with a soft metallic echo, the sound of a chapter ending without ceremony. The fluorescent hum that had filled every space of this journey was gone now, replaced by the quiet of morning. Elijah stood in that stillness, breathing in the thin, clean air of the new day. No triumph, no relief, only the clarity of what had been done and what remained to be faced. Far below, a bus passed with its windows flashing sunlight like slow-motion camera shutters. For an instant, it looked as though the whole city blinked, and when its reflection faded, Elijah Cross turned from the window, leaving the light behind him, not as absolution, but as witness.